Very good to have you with us, John. How important is this for South Africa?
Well, thank you very much. It is important, and South Africa, in getting elected to the non-permanent seat for the third time, promised to advance the African agenda, Jane. And in that context, there's one specific issue that we hoped would be brought to a head during their presidency here in October, but it's problematic, and that is for funding by the UN assessments of basic budgets for the African Union's contribution to peacekeeping operations in Africa, where 80% of the UN peacekeepers are anyway. The AU is really stepping up, but they, despite their enhanced contributions, need UN reliable funding. And South Africa has been advancing a proposal for that, but it has not yet been successful.
Yeah, because there is a request to boost the cooperation between the UN and the African Union. There's also hopes that more Africans will be able to get permanent seats there. Any chance of that?
Well, the permanent seat question is, I'm afraid, a distant dream, because the politics are so paralyzed within the permanent five. You know, on the one hand, there's the group of two, Russia and China, and then the group of three, the U.S., Britain, and France. But the real fly in the ointment is the Trump administration, because on this question of reliable, sustainable funding for AU contributions to UN peacekeeping operations in Africa, South Africa was very, very active in promoting and sponsoring an earlier draft of this, and back in last year in December. And the U.S. suggested it would veto it unless it could be assured of greater transparency, less expenses. No one was really clear what their concerns were, because they're so mixed messages these days. And unfortunately, it's been through many iterations and changes, and they met only last week, the Peace and Security Council from the AU representatives and the UN Security Council. And they deliberated, but they didn't reach any conclusion. So expanding the membership is a distant dream that we all like to see, so it would be more legitimate. But I don't think the political support is there. I did think the political support was there for South Africa's leadership in getting sustainable funding for AU contributions to African peacekeeping.
I mean, that really raises the issue of, whether the UNSC is still relevant. I mean, all those resolutions against Israel, which get quashed, what you say about Africa and the lack of movement there, the Donald Trump administration. I mean, what are we really going to get out of this?
Well, that's always a bottom line question at the broadest sense. But yes, work does go on. Peacekeeping operations in the Congo and Sudan and CAR and Mali, these are all extremely valuable. They're part of the confidence building process between the African Union and the United Nations Security Council, and peace operations by the UN anyway. In the Congo, South Africa invested very heavily in the 2006 transition. This has been a difficult process, but progress does get made, and that's at the working level. That's beyond the noise of Donald Trump and Boris Johnson and whatever is going on with Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin. It's the working level, and South Africa is very talented, I think, at working these channels. It's just that you do run into blockages like this threatened veto of the cooperation. There are issues, and that the details are really complicated, but there are issues, and yet people are still working, Jane, and that's the important point. You don't want to lose sight of the fact that peace operations in Africa are important, need to be sustained, and could be sustained with a little more cooperation. And I think the South African and African other members have been saying, let's work with the U.S. Congress more. Let's try to find ways to work around whatever is going on in the craziness of Washington these days, because this
okay, so, John, can I just ask you, and briefly, if you will, I mean, considering what's been happening in the country, I know that there's a focus on silencing the guns. I mean, we've got so many guns, unlicensed guns, gender-based violence, those issues, the xenophobia we've seen in the country. Does that take away any of our leverage here, any of our clout?
Well, I've argued that it in fact, is the key to South Africa's soft power clout in the international community. I thought Cyril Ramaphosa was right to send Minister Pandor in his absence and stay here and work on gender-based violence and work on violence against foreigners, as well as the economic agenda. If South Africa can get itself pulled out of the hole that it was in for the last 9 years, it will be a lot stronger voice on the international stage. That's the same argument I make with regard to the post-Trump America revival, if it ever happens.
All right, and we're going to stay with Trump, but let you go, John. Thank you very much.